Good evening. My name is Gene Bergman. I'm the Ward 2 City Councilor in Burlington, and welcome to Burlington Progressives TV. I am here tonight with a very special guest, our Mayor, Emma Mulvaney-Stanek.
Thank you, Gene.
And we're here to talk about the Town Meeting Day ballot, and in particular the bonds. And then I know that we've got other things. We've got stuff to talk about in terms of the next year's budget. We've got a tax fairness working group. We've got community safety and wonderful continued news about the interim chief and modern gov. So welcome.
Thank you.
And tell us about the Town Meeting Day ballot.
Well, it's a very important ballot coming up. It's the first one since I've been mayor, and I have to actually stop for a second and just reflect that it's been great to come back to the Progressive Town Meeting TV show. I think Richard Kemp, started this for a long period of time, and it's just nice to see generations pass down these important conversations on local TV to talk about local city stuff. And
I am one generation under him.
I'm saying, right, and then maybe I'm one more from you.
Yeah, we'll get that.
I think that shows the evolution of this city. But to especially be able to come on and talk about things from the progressive lens of what progressive politics looks like in Burlington today. And I think the ballot's a perfect good example of that out of the gate. So we have several city questions on there. We have 3 bonds, as people have probably heard, which I'm happy to go over, and 3 charter changes, which are important policy questions that we're putting forward to voters as well. So the 3 bonds are really important investments in our city's future. They are an opportunity for us to really talk about the next 20 years of where the city's headed, to be able to really advance our critical goals of community safety, ample and affordable housing in the city, and even some of our climate goals that we really can't achieve as quickly if we aren't really putting these strategic investments into our city.
So we've got 2 water-related bonds, one a waste and storm and one drinking water. And then we've got what's called a general obligation, a GO bond, but it actually is related to go, and there's a lot of vehicles, there's a lot of, so let's take the water stuff.
Sure.
But clearly there is a continuing, and we've acknowledged that, concern around affordability. And there are some folks who go, well, why do you have to do this all, and why do you have to do it now? So in terms of talking about it,
I'm glad we're starting it from that angle. It's a very progressive way to think about it, because affordability is very much a lens we're looking at with why we're putting these bonds forward, and also how it connects to our next fiscal year budget and how taxes are being figured out here in the city. So when we have infrastructure that has been deferred in terms of upkeep and maintenance, a few things start to happen. First of all, it gets way more costly when something breaks when in an emergency situation, whether it be a water main or a building failure with a roof, or something even more egregious like HVAC system. The HVAC system has broken several times just in the 11 months I've been mayor in City Hall.
In City Hall.
In City Hall, for 6 weeks we went with no air conditioning in May and June, and I thought we were all going to die of heat stroke. The heat broke in December in the building. So owning 19 buildings, which the city does, takes upkeep and strategic investments, much like owning a house, right? If you defer, eventually becomes more costly. And then we have less we can do with our limited funds. So part of this is making sure that we are being smart about the use of our resources, stewarding our assets carefully. When I first walked in, we had to sell one of the city buildings.
It was a very hard decision for me. I am not in favor of privatization. I'm not in favor of selling public assets if we can't help it. And yet, if you are faced with 2 terrible choices, you try to maybe take the least terrible one.
This was 200 Church Street, which is where Burlington Telecom and then a few of our city departments, HR, Community Justice Center, are located. And our hand was forced because we had deferred maintenance so much that the building became something that became a loss for us, really, to put more into that building. And now one of the other things that is a glaring reminder of when we defer maintenance, things come offline and turn into urban blight, and we lose assets. Memorial Block or Memorial Auditorium moratorium, unfortunately, is a real tragedy, an example of how we've not stewarded this. I feel like an old lady saying this, but way back when I was on city council back in 2009, 2012, I remember whoever was the capital person at the time coming in and talking about how important the capital budget was in making sure we were doing strategic investments in the upkeep and maintenance, the regular maintenance. And they talk about the bricks starting to come off that building. And fast forward about another 7-8 years, the building had to be shut down due to safety concerns.
I mean, it speaks to some fundamental systemic problems. I think that that's where the tax fairness group comes in, because we've got a tax structure which makes it really hard to ask people to pay more in property taxes, even when it's legitimate. And yet, if you don't do it, then really bad things happen. And you know, that's an example. For me, I think that there's real leadership in asking what asking people for what's necessary, knowing that there's no way around the cost. And so if you're going to have a livable city, let alone a sustainable city and an affordable city, you've got to do that. Speaking sort of this affordability, we did approve a proposal which reduces significantly these water bonds in terms of the ask. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, and I want to come back eventually to the tax fairness working group as well, because the GO bond is obligated by property taxpayers versus the water and lake bonds are obligated by water ratepayers, which are most of the time the same people, of course. But when it's a rate, when it's from a revenue source, the mechanics of the bonds are a little bit different. So when we think about the water and lake bonds, our staff did real due diligence to make sure they were transparent of educating the public on all of the maintenance, upkeep, and infrastructure investments needed in our main plant. We have 3 different wastewater treatment plants throughout the city. The largest one is the main plant down on the waterfront. But we also have a drinking water system, including a very critical reservoir that sits up near UVM campus and UVM Medical Center that supplies water not only and pumps water up to the hill, but if we ever had our system go offline, that's a critical water storage system for everyone's drinking water supply in the city. And so after a lot of vetting and making sure we're looking at other revenue sources that could bring in loans or grants or other kind of mechanisms, our staff were able to phase out the work and really ask for the most critical bonded money, which is around $175 million for our lake bond, which is the wastewater, stormwater side of it, and then about $20 million for the lake bond side of it. Now, the thing we have already been able to do around affordability for the lake and water bonds, when you look at your water bill, if you are of a certain income level, and this is right now for low-income folks, we have a program. About 70 or so water customers use this program to get some relief on your water bill. We are looking at places like Seattle, Washington, and seeing what that city has done with its water utility to make an even more progressive and equitable system so folks with different income levels have the ability to pay. As you'll hear our staff talk about, water is a basic need, a basic right, and we never want someone having to make an unfortunate choice between paying their water bill and putting food on the table. So we've already gotten started. I think we're the only water utility in the state that has an affordability program, and we can do more. Now, when all things equity-based, right, we have to also make sure we balance that out with other payers, including commercial users of our water system, and just making sure we have a fair system. So we're on our way, and we're going to do more to make sure that these bonds people can pay them, and they understand what's behind their water bill and understand what's behind the property tax bill as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's these ranges by which within which people can afford, and you go over, and that's true. But some people have greater ability to move that. You know, clearly, when you can charge prices for things because you're in business and you get to set your prices, you've got a little bit of flexibility there. The market can be harsh, and so we have to be conscious of that. So that's good. But we did move it down. I mean, I think that the ask is 150 for the
Well,
the water?
between the two different bonds, it's just under 200 million. It used to be more like 225 million.
Okay.
So we've reduced it significantly.
Yeah.
And I should also say, Jean, because as I said, only about 70 customers are using right now the water affordability program. People can reach out. The number is on your water bill to understand if you're eligible for that program. Right now, if you're basically eligible for any state subsidy program, be it SNAP or other kinds of subsidies, you're likely eligible for our water utility affordability program. And also our Burlington Electric Department also has an affordability program. We're doing our best to make sure this is better known and eventually hopefully getting to a place where we can have people be opted into the program. That is actually one of the best ways you can set up affordability programs, is if we can make sure our electric department is working with our water department for income verification. We don't have to have people have to prove themselves multiple times, take those barriers away, and make sure that we're truly working cohesively as a city to make sure access is always an easy thing for folks, regardless of income.
Yeah, and we'll maybe get into it later, but the complications with water, unlike electric, is that you've got homeowners, or the property owner is the payer of it, and so in a city which has got between 65 and 70% renters, we've got to figure out ways to get into the renters and to actually make that a reduction in their monthly cost, as opposed to just a pass on to landlords who, in my mind, are making enough money right now. I mean, they're not 100%. I mean, I'm sure that there are people who are bought high and are now stuck or have things, but this is a very favorable
But exactly
market.
getting to the renters, particularly because if you're a renter, you're the one using electricity and water, and so you should be able to be more empowered to be able to not only pay a fair bill, but have the relief necessary based on what your income is. We have way more to do on renters and making sure that the affordability is a real thing for folks here in the city, and that's part of what the Tax Fairness Working Group is charged with.
Yeah. I mean, we won't jump to climate, but you've got that split incentive in terms of weatherization and heat. Because if a landlord doesn't pay for the heat, well, who cares? But we care as a community, and the people who are paying it care. So that's another one to do. The GO bond. What is that going to fund? You talked a little bit about the buildings. But, is there a priority list of the buildings? Like, what are the highest?
Yes, well, in terms of the buildings, you can look at, first of all, everything we're talking about, you can find more information on our elections page. You just go to burlingtonvt.gov. There's a big bright button that says elections. Click on that, and you'll find everything on each of the items of the ballot. And one of the things I love, the fact that we mail ballots now to every registered voter, and if you didn't get it, there's still plenty of time to get the ballot. You can call City Hall or go down and vote in person, or go to any polling location that's near you and vote in person and register same day here in Vermont and in Burlington. But you can look up every single item. So you can be at home and researching things and have that information at your fingertips. So there you will find information around the GO bond. In terms of those 19 buildings, we're prioritizing the ones who need real upfits and support. And when I talked about community safety, that looks like being able to support our police station and our fire, and especially our central fire station and the one in my neighborhood, the Old North End #2 station on North Avenue. The floor of that particular fire station of #2 isn't strong enough, literally, to hold the weight of what a modern day fire truck is like, and so we have to replace that floor. That is part of current capital plans, but we have other pieces of the building that need support. One North Avenue, I don't know how long people have been in Burlington. That was never built to be an actual police station.
I believe that Acme Glass I remember buying stuff from there at Acme Glass.
I think it's been a paint store, a glass store, I think even a mechanic shop or something. The building's in rough shape, and so some of there's current capital going in, but what this GO bond will eventually allow us to do is to repair HVAC system in the administrative wing, which is where command staff are. It will help us to do more upfits to the gym and renovations, both on the inside and the outside of the building. If you drive by now, you'll see some work on the building. That's current capital money, and that's what it looks like when we are able to invest in our building. An important thing people should know, under our charter, if we don't pass the GO bond, the city only has $2 million to work with each year. $2 million to cover 19 buildings, a whole fleet, which is fire trucks, snow plows, police cruisers, everything you think of, snow dragons, which my neighbors call the sidewalk plow, for example, as well as our streets and sidewalks, our traffic calming measures. All this stuff goes into our capital budget. So if we are limited to just the $2 million for which we're allowed to do in any regular year without this additional $20 million, it will take much, much longer for us to do these critical upgrades to our system.
Yeah, I believe it will take even longer given 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum and the host of other wonderful things that are coming down from
and supply
Trump
chain has already been an issue, not to mention what the Trump administration nightmare that it really is a nightmare at this point to be a leader of a municipality navigating frozen grant funding, unknown impacts on supply chains from places where we often have to order vehicles and parts, and even down to just basic infrastructure of repairs to buildings. It's very significant. So if we don't take this moment to be able to bring resources online, there's a lot of much more uncertainty over the next 4 years ahead.
Yeah. So so buildings and building systems, vehicles.
The fleet. So fire trucks are very expensive and they take years to put into the pipeline to order. But in terms of community safety, it's around snow plows. It's around fire trucks and police cruisers to be able to address some of the backlog of upgrading our fleet. We've deferred putting more new vehicles on the roads, and we have to catch up to that investment. And also, I consider public safety also traffic calming measures.
Sure.
One of my kids in particular walks to school with a big fifth grader that has her companion down North Street every morning, thinking about what we can do to slow cars down, both in the design of streets, but making sure that we have safe places for pedestrians and bikers, whether they're small children. There's a 7 and 70 rule, I think, out there in the bike ped world where a 7-year-old should be able to safely navigate our streets alone as much as a 70-year-old. And we're not there yet, and there's a lot of great advocates in this community and many just neighbors and residents who've given many ideas. I think we can achieve I think the statistic is around 70 to 75% requested traffic calming measures can be achieved if we are able to support the GO bond.
It will be great. I know that the folks on Rose Street have been pushing for changes to deal with speed. There have been accidents. There was a motorcycle accident that led to a death, and we really do need to increase the resources that are there. You look at all of the furor over, say, the Winooski Bridge, or even the Main Street TIF, and the bike and pedestrian improvements that are there. So you've got that, or the so-called Champlain Parkway, which I'm not a fan of, but I will have to live with the new world.
About generations of a project that finally,
having all of that stuff. I mean, and the streets themselves. This will also allow us to improve sidewalks. More sidewalks, more streets. I know we get from the Central District somebody who lives in Cathedral Square, and virtually every city council meeting, she's disabled, and she comes and says, these sidewalks are terrible.
Yes.
Right?
Shout out to Jane if you're listening tonight, Jane. You are heard every council meeting.
Yeah, I mean,
about 2 to 3 miles of sidewalk a year we'll be able to achieve upgrading, and I do hope that we get Cherry Street on that list.
All right. Well, maybe we've exhausted quite a bit of time on this. Your choice. We could talk about the tax fairness
Mayor's
group.
choice.
Yeah, of course.
Let's talk about that. Since we're still on money, and then we can talk a little bit about the charters, because I want to make sure people know there's 3 charter questions as well, which can sometimes be a little bit of a sleeper issue if you are not familiar with what the charter is all about and how we changed the charter. So our tax fairness working group when I became mayor, part of both my leadership style is one of collaboration, listening, and surrounding myself with a diversity of both community members and content experts to help round out how to lead this city forward. And when I talk about affordability, I really mean it. So this particular advisory group is comprised of about 15 or so people, about half city staff and half community members, who are focused solely on understanding our tax system locally and how we can find new strategies, new tax policy that impact residential property taxpayers, but also renters, and figure out different structures we can bring online to make sure that people are have a fair system of paying into what generates revenue for the city. This is looking at both what residents bring to the table, but also what we generate from the commercial side of things. We're going to try to do more education in general as the city, but this tax fairness working group has to look at a lot of different mechanisms. We have 13 splinter tax, which I didn't even know what those were before I was mayor.
Yeah.
I can be honest about that, because we have built a tax system that's pretty complicated on a local level. You have the general tax rate, and then you have 13 different splinter tax that are dedicated to individual different parts of the city's functions and operations and can only be used for those functions.
Yeah.
One example that people might remember from last town meeting day was that the public safety tax question was on there. That's one of the 13 splinters that could only be used for police and fire services right now. It cannot be used for public health, community safety issues, for example.
So folks in the, even though everybody says, well, look at all this drug use that's happening, to be able to put police officers are not drug people, they arrest people, right? Or move along kind of people. So we can't use them for that. Mental health.
Right. Not right now.
You can't, so the idea is to look at that and see if we can do what?
Well, eventually, I think part of what so the tax fairness group is really focused on how do we collect taxes in a fairer way based on people's ability to pay. When people look at your overall tax bill, if you're a property taxpayer and own a house, for example, about a third of your bill is what goes to the municipal side of government, if you will. The other 2/3 is to the education fund on the state level. For that 2/3, there is by state law a formula based on paying by what your income level is. So if you are property rich but income poor is a simplified way you sometimes hear about this, you are not paying the actual value of your property because it's done through a formula based on what your actual income is. So this helps fixed income individuals, especially seniors, low income folks, be able to stay in their homes and pay based on that percentage. It all shakes out because then the larger tax pool of folks around the state make up for whatever lower income people need in terms of rebate. That does not exist. That formula does not exist for the third of the bill for municipal side. And so that's part of the charge, among many other ideas, is what can we do on the local level that accounts for income? Because we don't pay municipal tax based on your income at all. It's all based on property. And by extension, for landlords, they pay property based on their commercial, building, if you will. And then they often pay it right through or charge it right through to rents. And I think we all can say pretty uniformly at this point that the rents are out of control in this city. And one way for us to start to bring some level of rent control, and when I talk about rent control and rent stabilization, there are multiple policy ideas out there. When I was still a candidate for mayor, I was talking about, and this is one of the things that the Fairness Working Group will look into, is how do we incentivize landlords who want to be able to do the right thing and have a modest, sometimes flat increase to rent year to year? How do we reward that kind of choice on the property tax side of it? I would much rather give some sort of tax rebate to a landlord who is keeping rent at 2% increase or a 0% increase or something very reasonable to cost of living to help us cool off the hot market for rents. If you are just making a pure profit off of renters in this city, I have no interest in giving you a tax benefit by any means, because you are hurting the ability of the city to remain an economically diverse community.
Yeah, I mean, and we do have a measure of progressivity in terms of the property tax as it relates to commercial buildings, right? Bernie did that. I mean, when you talk about your working group, your tax fairness working group, I mean, it's akin to what Bernie did in the 80s when Reagan cut revenue sharing, and we had to come up with other ways. And much of the ways we've been able to keep the city afloat are based on the ideas that came out of that task force. But for residential landlords, they don't pay that extra amount, even though they are in business. It is a big business in town, right? So I hope that they'll be looking at ways to protect small landlords, because that's clearly, but look at the sort of discrepancy that exists with not considering them commercial enterprises, while still understanding that, you know, we've got to protect tenants. If you raise those taxes, they're just going to be passed on in this market. So we've got to figure out a way to not have that happen. So that's important. You know, that we work on all of them. Well, that's essential for us to be able to do, because I was just reading a public assets study about demographics, and you know, the state is growing in population. You know, despite the myths that nobody is coming here, that everybody's moving out, and in fact, this report that just came out in the last month has that people with more money are coming here, right? So so the demographics, you know, relate to the affordability, the lack of affordability. People who are making less or having a really hard time. You know, these are the heart of our community, the Old North End. So we need, you know, so this is really important. You want to pivot to something else right now?
Yeah, well, let's stay on the theme of money and talk about the next budget, because I think that ties in with how we are trying to continue to push this affordability, and what does that actually mean and look like in terms of the policies and initiatives we're putting forward. So when I walked in the door about a year ago almost, I walked into a structural budget gap within what would be the fiscal year 25 budget. It was sizable. Our general fund budget in general is about $105 million total. I walked into a $14 million budget gap. It was shocking and alarming and very difficult to work on finding solutions for that. What that reflects, frankly, though, is several years of the size of the city of Burlington government growing. We had a lot of one-time funds from the federal government. We built a lot of wonderful programs, but there was a lot of expansion of personnel and programming that didn't have a transition plan to what revenue source would continue to make it continue to go forward. So without any plan, the only default option is to increase taxes more significantly, which is something I knew was not something that the city could afford coming in. So we did a lot of very quick work in those, because I had to deliver a budget in about 6 weeks from walking in the door.
It's so unrealistic.
It was very stressful and very unfair, I will say.
Yeah,
and so we worked really hard, and I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to provide a diverse set of options for tools we were given. Town Meeting Day had already happened. I couldn't even ask for another tax increase. But I wanted to make sure that we were not putting all of that burden on the backs of residential taxpayers. Back to that public safety tax, just as an example of one of the 13 splinter tax. We could do a whole show on the 13 splinter tax in Burlington. It's like a book maybe, or a TED Talk. But we were authorized by voters to use 3 cents on the public safety tax, knowing that, again, remember, that can only be used for police and fire, not for any of these other public health, community safety issues that I think everybody acknowledges is out there.
Drugs, mental health,
that, you know, sheltering people who are unsheltered, et cetera. So we only used 2 cents of the 3 cents, because I wanted to make sure that, and we worked together actually, to make sure that the commercial side of what we can tax in the city also brought some more revenue to the table to pay for all of these, especially the needs of our community safety being so nuanced. To make sure we balance it out. So we increase very slightly gross receipts, which are our meals and alcohol revenues, and then also our hotel tax that we can charge locally, to make sure we balance that for folks. We also held several positions vacant for the year to save some on personnel. And we did that in a point of time to just really plug this hole while we almost immediately started working on the next year fiscal year budget, which is what's coming up now, fiscal year 26. And we're taking a much deeper and fairer deep dive into defining what are core services in the city. Every one of the 18 departments has been working since December, identifying what do they offer in terms of services. Is it a core service, meaning is it required by our charter or by ordinance? Is it a key function? For example, having the streets plowed from snow, is it essential service, for example? But other things that have grown over the last several years in particular, is it as critical? And so we're going through this deep vetted system so that we can make sure that we are right-sizing. And I want to be clear, because I'm clearly a progressive. Right-sizing is not the same thing as austerity measures, which are blunt measure to kind of, I think, defund government's functions to be able to actually provide basic services, those core functions, in a very blunt and strategic way that often Republicans do to make government dysfunctional and therefore working people frustrated that government's not functioning.
You're seeing that right now.
Oh my God, it's on super speed on the federal level right now.
On the federal level. Grover Nyquist shrink government so much that you can drown it in a bathroom.
Yeah, and then people are incredibly frustrated and disempowered, et cetera, that they don't even want to vote, right? So we're doing it in a very strategic way of right-sizing and getting really clear on our core services so we can better say to taxpayers, this is what we need to function, These are core efforts that are priorities of this city for now and the next 5 to 10 years. And once we, I think another year or two of working on this budget, we'll be able to get to a place of offering in the city multiple year budgets, meaning people will know and we can get to a predictable place of saying, we generally know the increase of the cost of living and salaries and benefits with our unionized city employees. We can project forward a much more stable and predictable way for working people to plan, to know what expected tax increases can be, what they're used for. And I want to get the city within the next 3 years to a place where people can also be a seat at the table. It's a participatory budgeting style model.
I've been pushing this for years.
And in particular, back to capital, in particular, how do we use capital? Other communities like, well, big communities, New York City and even Hartford, Connecticut, use these models where communities get to sit down and say, okay, let's just say we have $1 million to spend on parks infrastructure. Where are we going to spend it most? I heard a mayor from another city, they use it a little bit in community safety measures, not just police and fire, but other concepts of what makes our neighborhood safe. And they were talking about they wanted better lighting and tree trimming because there was nefarious stuff happening, not great stuff happening because this hadn't been invested in various parts of the city.
Sure. I mean, we've had these conversations when we were looking at community-based policing a long time ago. And we were doing things around environmental efforts like like street lights. I mean, and there's ebb and flow, but we've tended to sort of do them for a little bit, and they either get embedded and then we forget about the concept, so we just let them fester. One of the revenue sources was the gross receipts tax, you said, but we did sunset that. Is there going to be a proposal?
We're going to come back in March, and I think we have another structural budget gap that we're trying to close. And so we're going to, again, try to give a balanced set of solutions of how do we close that gap one more time. And I think it needs to be a tool that we consider about not sunsetting the gross receipts, because at this point, if we don't sunset it, we are very strategic about not bringing to voters and on this ballot that we were talking about earlier, a request for an increase to the general rate tax increase, which is the largest part of the many different little splinter taxes we talked about, because I wanted to make sure that we were not asking folks to increase taxes on top of also supporting these bonds. And we worked really hard to figure out other ways to reduce personnel in strategic ways, things we'll bring to voters in March to fully explain like where we plan to do that, again, in a very informed way. We're leading up to this work, working with unions to make sure impacted employees are notified and understand and understand where this is coming from. And so that was an important piece that people should know for this upcoming budget, is that we're not asking for additional tax increases for folks to authorize. But there's other smaller splinter taxes that we're looking at, including the gross receipts portion, which we may not be able to sunset because we need to continue to make sure that we have a balanced revenue source between commercial and residential taxpayers.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think it's a fine line between being lean and efficient and focusing on, key services and austerity. And you can tip into that. I heard people, we're talking about increasing the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And I heard talk at the council level about, well, we don't want any additional money going to administration, as if somehow this magically happens without administrators. So, and that's what's happening at the NIH right now. I was just listening to a public radio show this morning about them slashing, really gutting the administrative fees, which means that people don't have the resources to take out the garbage, to pay for the lights, to do all this stuff. I mean, like, what brainiac? I mean, if you don't want things to work, that's a great way to do it. If you're just going to be a sham and a panderer or whatever, you're going to do that. So this is going to be a trick.
Well, also, and these are jobs. These are Vermonters. These are Vermonters' jobs that are good union-paid jobs that are the backbone of our local economy. That have pensions and health benefits. They support a lot of families. So we don't take this lightly in how we're again being very strategic around what's core service or not. But at the same time, government functions when we invest in our own selves.
We have to do that. You want to pivot because we have about 10 minutes. You want to go to the?
By fast.
Yeah, it does. We have about 10 minutes. So we can talk about look at that, exactly, thank you, Kevin. 10 minutes, we can talk about the charter changes, or we can talk about the interim chief, or...
Well, I definitely want to talk about the interim chief, so let's do a speed round on the charter so people know what's on there. Again, you can go back to the elections button at burlingtonvt.gov for more information on this in plain language, because chartered language is often very legalese. I'm here with a lawyer, shock. Look, there's the website. So it is the...
Thank you, Kevin.
Oh, well, I went by too fast. I was going to tell you the color. I think it's one of the blue ones. We're on the election page itself. There's not only voting information here, but as I mentioned, all the information on the ballot itself that you can look at in more detail.
And people really should look at sample ballots as well as the warnings, because the sample ballot will have the plain English, but the real full language is in the warning language. And that, for those people who say, well, are you really telling me what you're doing here? You're doing a lot more. You can go to the actual language and do that. So I do advise
all the lawyers out there can go to the warrant stuff to read it.
I think it's very accurate.
It is very accurate, and I also think that in terms of making sure that we continue to make government accessible, plain language is critically important for English speakers, for other language speakers, in terms of translating and making sure that our ballots are accessible. But here's the speed round. There's 3 charters. One will look very familiar because about 10-12 years ago, the city of Burlington already passed a charter change proposal to ban firearms, guns, from any establishment that serves liquor or has a liquor license with the city. Right now, we have a handful of businesses doing this on their own, bars in particular, especially after the very tragic shooting outside of Red Square last summer. And now we need consistency, and we also need to restart the momentum in the General Assembly down at the State House, who ultimately has to approve any charter changes for any town or city in the state of Vermont. So we're working with partners for our Burlington elected delegation down there to restart the momentum, to bring this very common sense gun measure to do some more gun control for the city of Burlington. So that's number one. The second one is related to notifications related to tenants and landlords and changes to lease and rents. This is particularly important language to enable us on the ordinance level to be able to really think about most vulnerable populations, people who are elderly, people living with disabilities, who would have a much harder time making a transition to another apartment. So making sure there's fair notification timelines and information shared with those tenants is really critical.
Especially at a time where there's like no housing. So and
literally,
and so the time frames that we allow and that are being used are way too short.
Right. Well, and you're on the charter. You're the actual chair of the charter committee.
Actually, yes, I got these all, but you're doing a great job.
Well, the last one is redistricting. This is one where I sweat a little bit because I might oversimplify it, but we have a pretty detailed way that we describe the borders of our elected districts and wards within the city down to the street level. And so I consider this sort of a modernizing effort to make sure that we send what we need to down to Montpelier and don't have to go down to the granular level of a street or a half street name. And when we ever change due to the census, the boundaries for our elected districts. So this is an important one to update that part and allow us to make these decisions on a local level and not have to go back to the legislature every time.
The way I say it is, I don't really understand why people in Morgan, Vermont High Judd, or down in Brattleboro or anywhere else should say whether we divide wards 2 and 3 on North Street or Elmwood Avenue.
Yeah.
It's like, please.
Yeah. And Burlington often has a lot of charter changes. I used to serve in the legislature right before I became mayor. Not many other towns do it this way. So this is a good method for us to update our charter and get to modern times.
Yep.
But let's talk about the interim chief. Yeah, I'm very excited about this.
Congratulations. I worked with Sean for a long time. I really like him a lot.
It's a big deal.
It is.
I've been working for weeks. Chief Murad, our current chief of police, gave notice to me back in November that he did not intend to seek reappointment, which is a process we go through in May, June of each year. And so I got right to work immediately calling law enforcement leaders who had history with the Burlington Police Department, who are leaders in other agencies throughout the state, to do a couple things. Start to figure out who might be available and interested in stepping in as interim, and advice and counsel on how to embark on a police chief hiring process. And so Chief Burke was actually one of the first people I talked to because he has 21 years of service and history with the Burlington Police Department. He left at the rank of Deputy Chief of Operations. He as he describes it in his own words often, he really grew up and owes a lot of his professional experience because of his time here in Burlington. So when I initially reached out to him, he is the chief currently in South Burlington. He was perfectly fine being there, and so I moved on with my calls. I sought his advice on general process and moved on. But we kept talking, and he really showed how dedicated he is to this agency in this city. He knows that we have a lot of challenges facing us and wants to come back to help rebuild this department, to have an internal focus on really the folks working within that department, to really take an honest review of our recruitment strategies, what is working, what is not, how are we working on workplace culture and climate that can help retain highly qualified individuals we want to retain here to build the kind of police department that we deserve. And we have such great values alignment on understanding the nuance of community safety. Police are not the answer to every single community safety concern, and Chief Burke really shows a great understanding of that just through his own work over in South Burlington, but also in his several leadership roles. I have a list here. He's currently on the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission for the state of Vermont. He has served on the Department of Public Safety, again, state level school crisis planning team. He's the first vice president of the Vermont Association of Chiefs of Police, and he chairs the Vermont Law Enforcement Advisory Board. He has such great respect, and every time I've been able to update folks, whether it's our police union or it's city councilors, I hear a interesting pregnant pause, and then usually a wow, or really, or how did you do that? That's amazing. That's wonderful for Burlington. So I want to be clear, I really appreciate Chief Murad's service to the city, but this makes sure we have a smooth transition. Chief Burke will start at the end of March. This is what we really owe the folks who have been hanging in there within the Burlington Police Department, and better and stronger times are ahead.
You know, sometimes I've heard people say that the council and the mayor don't support the police, the people who work in the police department, and there is no better rebuttal than this hire. Mm-hmm. It's a credit. It's a giant plume.
It's a huge, right, exactly, a huge feather, a big plume. Because I just want to be very clear. When I say community safety is my number one priority, I mean it. People who know me well know that I am a very hard worker. I'm dedicated and focused, and knowing that one of the reasons I ran to be mayor is I have small kids in this community. I'm not going anywhere, and I know we have incredible work to do, but we need strong partnerships between the mayor and department heads. We need rebuilding trust within our departments, be it the police department or any department, and members in parts of our community. But we need the right leadership and the right approach to leadership that really understands how critical partnerships are, not only within city government, but with critical, in this case, criminal justice partners at the state's attorney's office, around the region. We have great things to be really proud of from the history of the Burlington Police Department. And this is a moment where we can reinvest in ourselves and really put us on a new course.
Well, I'm very excited about this, and I really look forward to being part of it over the next year. Will be, be kind of exciting.
And one thing to be clear about Chief Burke is it's not only exciting for him to come in, he has a 2-year commitment with the city. So he'll serve as interim chief, but we will get to work this spring with, we just hired IACP, which is a national firm to help us find our permanent chief. And I'm excited in particular about this firm because they've helped Hartford, Vermont, they've helped Rutland, Vermont.
There could be an overlap between them. Well,
that is smart leadership succession planning.
Yeah.
And then when the new chief comes in, they will still have time with Chief Burke to get their feet under them
Yeah.
and to have a really seamless transition, because the last thing this department needs is more uncertainty or instability.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot more to talk about. We didn't get into modern gov that much. We got a little bit into it. And perhaps we'll come back after the election. Maybe it will be a good thing to do in March, just as okay, what did we get out of this, and where are we going to go in the next few months as we build the budget and what have you. And thank you for,
All right,
for
thanks
coming.
so much, Gene. I appreciate it.
It is a pleasure to serve with you.
Well, same, Gene. It's great. Thank you.
Okay, well, folks, that's a wrap. We will see you next month on Burlington Progressives TV. Hope you all are staying warm, and have a good night.